So I'm going to talk a little bit about cover crops and rotational grazing, kind of intensive grazing, like Robert's doing a little bit. Who I am, I grew up in the Milo, Idaho area, which is in between Yukon and Ryrie, just east of Idaho Falls. I raise wheat, barley, alfalfa, and beef cows. We had dairy cows up till about 15 years ago and got smart and moved to beef. It's a lot simpler. I'm pretty small. I run about 400 acres of cropland, 100 acres of annual pasture ground, and then 70 acres that I've been doing cover crops on and intense rotational grazing the last 2 years. And I've got 85 pair of beef cattle. I got a bachelor's in ag business from BYU, Idaho, with an emphasis in ag systems. So technology was always my big thing. I love working on equipment. I love doing GPS systems. I love technology. And I did that for 10 years in addition to farming with the local John Deere dealerships in Idaho Falls and Rexburg. And then we had our 5th child in May of 2018. And so I've got 3 boys and 2 girls. And so why did I start into cover crops? Fertilizer bill, that was my number one reason. I was tired of writing out checks for fertilizer. And I started with fall seeded cover crops. In 2016, I started planting cover crops, usually just behind my wheat and barley crops, my cereal crops. And I also I've got irrigated ground and dry land ground. I'm about 50-50 split between irrigated and dry land. The irrigated is a mixture of pivot irrigation and flood irrigation. And then the dry lands on antelope, we get about 12 inches of rain a year. And then I also wanted to kind of do my part to keep the ground productive so that my kids, if they want to come back into the farm, that hopefully we can do that. And I'm the 5th generation on my farm, and so I want my kids to be able to be the 6th. Another reason for kind of doing the rotational grazing on the cover crops, I had the 70 acres that I put pivots on, just 2 small 3-tower pivots. It gave me some flexibility. That's the big thing that the pivots did for me, is I don't believe I could rotate the cows like I do under flood irrigated. It just takes too long to get across the ground, and then you're on a water rotation with the next guys down the stream, and you don't get the stream back for a while. So I was just trying to crunch numbers to figure out, being a small operation, how can we stay in business? And this was for the 2018 crop season. I took, part of that was in alfalfa initially, so I had 51 acres of wheat, 100 bushel per acre with the pivots. Gave me about 5,100 bushel to market at $4.35, which is not great. It's come up a little bit, but I got $5 this year out of my soft white, which gave me a gross of just over 22,000. So I was saying, okay, well, if I can go buy 60 head of yearling calves and rotate them and graze them all year long, set the bull out with them and breed the cows, then I sell them for $1,500 a head for replacement heifers, that'd be a 30,000 gross income, which with that, the fertilizer would be the same for the wheat versus the cover crops mainly. Herbicides, I wouldn't be spraying anything, because my cover crops mix of grass, legumes, brassicas, the whole shebang. And then I wouldn't have any harvest costs on the cover crops. I did have to put down some more water to keep those cover crops regrowing and producing than what I would have done on the wheat, shutting down in July for the pivots. And then operating line, I didn't have the cash to just go buy 60 heifers, so I got an operating line from Idaho Ag Credit. They helped me out, so I did have some interest on that. It all looks good on paper. It ended up okay, but I paid $1,000 a head for the heifers in spring of 2018, and I got $1,300 a head for a bred heifer in the fall of 2018. So that market was a little tougher, and so this year I did the same rotational grazing, but I just stuck with the cow-calf operation, which I had been doing, just added mother cows, and I'm doing better off just marketing, weanling 9 and 10 month old beef calves. So in 2016 and 2017, this was my cover crop mix. when I first started coming to some of these cover crop workshops, the biggest thing I heard was diversity, diversity, diversity. You know, you got to have diversity to build soil health. So my first mix, the NRCS, helped me kind of lay it out. And then going forward, I've taken it upon myself to kind of look at what's going to be good for the cattle to graze on. And so I've got multiple mixes that I've put together, and I tweak it every year. There's something I like about it, something I don't like about it, so I change it up. I add this, I take this out. So I had some crimson clover, spring peas, chickling vetch, common vetch, spring lentils, spring triticale, spring oats, certified spring grain barley. And this is a little harder to see in the back. Sorry, I just tried to take a snapshot of the seed tag. Purple top turnips, millet, radishes, impact forage collards, flax, and sunflowers. They did all right. It was a 14-way mix. What I've kind of heard through Gabe Brown talking, anything above 8 really helps. Anything below, you're not quite getting the benefit of the diversity. So I've always tried to stay above 12. It's just my personal preference. And that was kind of a fall seeded cover crop. That was after my grain crop. So I did soil tests in 2016 and again in 2018. I did it in 2017 too, but I just split a couple years to try and compare. The big things I was kind of looking at, is the cover crop gaining me anything? Am I getting any benefit in my soil? My organic matter starting out on my north pivot was 2.1. 2 years later it was 2.3. Soil health calculation was 4.4 and went up to 7.6. So that was off of a Haney test. And I don't know if that's a 1 year. I was off by 20 feet taking my soil sample. I GPS my samples every year when I take them, so I try to go back to the same spot to take the test. But in my mind, it looked like, okay, I've been doing it 2 years. I'm just following a cereal crop. Something's happening, though. It's going up. It's increasing. So something good is happening there. Then the south pivot, the same thing, small increases. You all have a soil health guide in front of you today, and this was the first one I had, the 4th edition. We're on the 6th now. This was a huge benefit to me, this reference guide, put out by Green Cover Seed. There's multiple seed companies that sell cover crop seed. There's local ones in Blackfoot around here. I chose to use Green Cover Seed because they had kind of a wealth of knowledge that was right there available for me to use. And so I walked through the back of the book. This one's the same. I thumbed through it this morning. They broke out by the categories of classifications of plants. Legumes, grasses, brassicas, broadleaves, all that's in there. So in my mixes, I haven't got to the point where I come back and replant a warm season crop later on in the summer. I try to plant heavy, cool seasons, and then I throw a couple of warm seasons in at the same time. And for the most part, I haven't had much problem with the warm seasons not coming through. Usually by June, July, they're starting to merge and grow, and I can see them coming through and helping out as well. And in the fall season, usually I'm planting in September. I've done 3rd week in August, and August definitely did better than September did as far as getting the crop up and growing and having some forage to graze after a wheat or a barley crop. But typically I've done cool seasons, and I'm still learning. I don't know what's better or worse, but that's what's worked for me. And so I'll go through each of the list, and it's got kind of a spreadsheet format at the bottom that tells you whether it's good for grazing or what benefits you're going to have. And so I kind of went through that, tweaking my cover crop mix that first and second year. And then as I got into 2018, I tweaked it some more. And so here's my 2018 cover crop mix that I built strictly for grazing. That was the purpose of this cover crop mix. I'd done it in the fall after my cereal crops. I kind of crunched the numbers and thought, well, hey, if cow manure or biology, if that's a big benefit, why not graze it summer long, get all that manure out in the field, get the benefit of the diversity of the cover crop. And as Marlon kind of showed in his presentation, seemed like after 2 years of grazing, there's some big benefits on that PLFA test. And I haven't done one yet, and I'm kind of excited to do one now to see what it does, because I just finished my second year of full season grazing. In my mind, 2 years ago when I started this, graze for 3 years, rotate that grazing to another plot of ground, graze there for 3 years, and the stuff that had been grazed put back into crop production. So I'm still kind of in the middle of trying to figure that out. But I kind of broke it fairly evenly between legumes, grasses, brassicas, and broadleaves. And this is going to be about a 16-17 way mix that I did. And I was looking in that green cover seed soil health guide. You know, I just looked at the spreadsheet. If something was very good or excellent for grazing, it had a shot at being put in my mix. Phacelia is one that's in here. It's not a grazer, but it's a pollinator. I wanted to be able to have some bees there and try to help that side of the ecosystem as well. Triticale's always been good for me. You know, it emerges and grows fast in the spring. Impact forage collards. I really like the forage collards. I've got some pictures of them, which Marlon did in his slideshow as well. The leaves just get as big as your hand, and the cows like to eat it. Faba beans, I put them in there. I've had turnips, radishes, sun hemp. Sun hemp's a good grazer. The cows like it. They don't care. Bayou kale. I did put some chicory and plantain in as a perennial that I didn't have to put them in every year. But I didn't want a complete perennial pasture. I wanted this to kind of be able to have some flexibility that 2 years down the road I can break it out and go put a cereal crop back behind it and not fight a perennial grass as much. So this is what I did. This is my plot of land. I still had an alfalfa field on the north half of one of the pivots. And I had just replaced the double discs on my box drill. And so I built some wire spools myself with some discs that had a bearing on them and a piece of rubber hose between the two. And I mounted on the four corner of the pivot a wire reel with electric fence wire. And that first year, I strung it out and hooked it up when the cows were ready to go in the paddock, and then I'd unhook it and I'd reel it back in when they were out in the next section, and then I'd let the pivot go around. That was very time consuming, usually because I'd park my pickup on the road down here, and it's only a quarter mile across all the way, so I'm walking an eighth mile, dropping electric fence posts, and then reeling the wire in. And it worked fine, but I got smarter this last year. I just unhooked the thing, dropped the knobs closest to the pivot track, and let the pivot drive over it. That was a lot simpler. And we got a utility vehicle, so I drove along the whole thing instead of walking. So that sped things up. But I'd rotate them. I've got an established grass pasture here and here that I'd kind of let them split on the 7th rotation. But there's kind of the electric fence spools I built right there. And I've got a 400-gallon trough on two sides, so the one trough can feed two paddocks at the same time. I'm going to be adding one to each corner of the pivot this year, this coming 2020 year, because moving back to mother cows and calves versus just heifers, we didn't have the 100-degree temperature days in 2019 like we did in 18, but I did have some heat stress in the cattle. I water them manually out of these troughs. Usually when the pivots are running, I put a 2-inch ball valve off the main line. I just go run a hose and water them real quick. Night and morning usually is when I do it. I am around the cattle quite often that time. They calve out in this cover crop mix too. I calve typically April and May is when I calve, and by then, unlike Robert, it's greened up pretty good, around here by then. So water availability was kind of the biggest thing. There's not a lot for trees. I'm looking at maybe adding some trees for windbreak and some shade for the cows. But as long as they had enough water, they did fine. So here's, when I bought all the heifers, we've always just used a manual written book to keep track of our cattle. I actually got an app for my phone. It is subscription based, but I can keep track of all of the cattle that I have and which paddock they're in. So I can set up each paddock, and as I rotated them every 2 days, I would rotate them in the app. So at the end of the year, I could see kind of how long they'd been in each place. And so this is kind of the south pivot. This is the southeast corner it says they were on. Oops, that was forward. Well, this will do the same thing. This is an aerial image of the same split. I had alfalfa in this section, and then this was just after they had grazed the southeast corner. And then they rotated. They were currently eating this one, and then the north pivot fences were dropped, and they were getting water on that cropland, and the alfalfa obviously was doing better. But the aerial image coincided with where I had grazed my cattle. And it was a pretty good stand for the most part. I didn't start grazing until it was up about 6 inches. And so as long as I moved them across and kept the water going, I did have some corners from the pivots. This one's flood irrigated. This one didn't really get much. I tried flooding through the first year and that didn't work. So I actually got some big gun sprinklers on tripods, and there's tripods out there that I'll kick on every week. So just for a few hours a day to give it some water. And then here again is just kind of the performance of the pasture on each of those paddocks. And so you can kind of count throughout the course of the year, depending on the paddock, it was 8 or 9 times that those cows rotated through that. And so the NRCS, I typically, here's where you got to be a little flexible in your rotation on your grazing management. Typically, I would do 2 days on each paddock, and then I would rotate them to the subsequent paddock. And so on that first layout, it was a 14-day rotation before they ever got back to any given paddock. So they would have essentially 2 weeks of regrowth on that cover crop. Yeah, it's just the same thing there. Doing that, I talked to my local conservationist at the Idaho Falls NRCS office, and Josh. They sent some people out. Tracy came out and threw hoops. They took clippings, dried it down, and did some dry matter tests. So in June of 2018, it came back, it was about 1,700 pounds per acre that we were getting. July production, I was up to 2,300 pounds, and then August it was back down to 17. So I averaged just shy of a ton per acre all summer long rotating those cows. So on my alfalfa, I typically get about 5 ton per acre with 3 cuttings. And so with this rotating and grazing the cows, I actually got more production out of the cover crops than I would have got trying to store alfalfa. So total, that would have been about 15,000 pounds per paddock every 2 weeks. With the amount of heifers that I had in there, that was 116 pounds of available feed per day per animal, which they didn't need near that much. So that showed me I had room to increase my stocking rates, which I did with the cow-calf operation in 2019. It's fun for the kids. My sons, they love going out and finding turnips and radishes. That's the best thing in the world for them. They just go out and we'll be out watering the cows. They go out with me. Sometimes this year in 2019, I just sent them out. I was up on the dry land spraying or doing something on the grain crops. And so I'd just call my wife and say, hey, have the boys go water the cows. The pivots were already on. All they had to do was throw the hose in the tank and open the valve. When it was full, they shut the valve. It's pretty simple. But they have fun doing it. There's the heifers just after I'd picked them up. I did build some freestanding feeders. Part of those paradigms that Robert talked about, on our farm, it was if you feed it out on the field, the cattle just waste it. They lay in it, they mess in it, they only eat 70% of it. So I built some feeders. I'd had some still laying around from other stuff, so I built those. And that's what I kind of fed them in the springtime and then in the fall. I did pull, in 2018, I started grazing about the second week in May. I planted early in April with my cover crop mix. And I grazed every 2 weeks, basically, around the paddock, all the way up through September. And I always had good regrowth. As soon as the cows were off, the pivot was going around, giving it water, started regrowing. Time it comes to September, things are cooling down, so I pulled the cattle off and I fed them for a week while I gave the cover crop an extra week to try and grow. And then I grazed them around another couple of times. So it's not that you don't have to manage it still, you do, you gotta be flexible. Sometimes I would rotate them every day, depending on where I was at in the year, how the crop was looking. You know, if it looked like they were gonna start overgrazing it too much, I kicked them to the next one. And then that did shorten the period interval between, but I didn't take so much off the top end of that plant that it couldn't regrow. There's down the fence line of the paddock they'd moved out of and the paddock they went into. And I usually just on the far ends, just have a handle on the electric fence. The cows, when I come out, you know, I don't herd my cows anywhere. I call them and they come to me. They see the pickup, the utility vehicle, the tractor. They know it. They usually come over. And at the end of the, day or 2 days, they knew it was time to be moved. I'd go open the handle and they'd just come running into the next paddock. I had a video on the end of it. I cut it off, but showed me out open, and my daughter was recording the video. She was 7 at the time, so it wasn't the best video anyways, but she had fun doing it. But as soon as I could get that gate out of the road, they came trucking into the new paddock. They were ready for it. I think that one's got my dog. No, that's I do put out a salt lick for them throughout the summertime, and just sitting out there. But the dog's out there with me a lot. He's a German Shepherd mix, and he goes everywhere. And a lot of times, I've got some other pictures that we'll see him out in the middle of it, and you can see him, how tall it is on him. He stands about this tall. He's a pretty good sized dog. And usually when I turn the cows into the cover crop, it's up about a foot and a half within that 2 weeks. And this was 2018. It was good and thick. Great growing season. I didn't have any complaints about 2018. There's some of the forage collards next to my hand, so they were good size. I did put a grazing sorghum and some brown midrib corn in there in 2018, which I kind of tweaked that for 2019 and took them back out. But good mixture, polyculture crop. And there's just some of the individual species. I've not once doing cover crops, whether it's been a fall seeded behind my cereal crop or whether it was full season grazing, I have yet to have an issue with establishment. No matter what size seed, no matter what variety, it always emerged and it always came out. I could go pick out the different things. I may not exactly know what it is until I go back and look, but I know it's there. There's my dog again, and just the tires with some salt lick. I'll kind of cruise through because I added some stuff for 2019. So here's 2019. Here's my mix. It was an 18-way mix this year in 2019. I changed it up again. I got rid of the brown midrib corn and the grazing sorghum, and I added some millet and some other stuff. But kale, sun hemp, triticale, barley, radishes, turnips. Those have always been there. They've been good production. I added some Ethiopian cabbage this year. I wanted to get some black oats to put in it, but green cover seed was kind of always out of the black oats when I was wanting to get them. The Florida broadleaf mustard I put in, and I saw pictures of those. Green cover seed's got a ton of YouTube videos, like Robert was saying. You can find a wealth of knowledge on YouTube on seeing stuff, but some of the mustard leaves were as big as a basketball. They were big. There's my seed mix as it came in a tote bag as I was dumping it in the drill. So there's a lot of variety in that. And I've never had any issue with it settling out. Yeah. I've typically planted my covers between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch. So kind of the rule of thumb that I was told starting off is whatever the majority of your mix is, whether it be peas or triticale or whatever, just plant at that depth and everything else will take care of itself. And it has done to this point. So,
and this is tilled soil?
Up to this point, it was tilled soil, yes. That was one of the facets of soil health that I had not adopted yet, was reducing the tillage, 2019, I did pick up a Notill Drill last spring. And so 2019, that was what overwintered from my 2018 grazing mix, mainly the triticale. Some of the radishes overwintered. There's chicory in there and plantain. And I went through and I planted the new mix into that. So I did not terminate or kill that crop because it's forage. My cows are going to eat it if it's green. So I left that.
And the new stuff came up okay in it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had the north pivot. I didn't get as good of establishment in that one, the south side of the south pivot. Yeah, it did great. And I don't know exactly the real reason. It was fairly dry when I planted. I know I ended up taking out some bushings and stuff on the coulter assembly on that drill because I was trying to punch it in the ground. I should have sent the pivot around one time. It wouldn't have taken very long. But I think I was a little dry when I planted that. Even though I put water right behind it, I don't think I got good seed to soil contact on that one. So here again, just some pictures of the cows out grazing in the pivots. The forage collards up top here again. That I believe is the mustard, the broadleaf mustard. And so you can see, on the right, a lot of that grass family really helps get up and gets things going. So you've got some good available forage for the cows. And there's just the field looking out. There was a lot of dandelion and stuff in it as well, which I'll try to address and see if I can do anything. I don't know if I can with the dandelion. That's in there, and there's the dog out foraging through it, and the utility vehicle driving out to it. But it's been a good, thick crop for the cows to go graze on both years that I've done it. And I hope I'm getting all that biology in the soil. Time to wrap it up? Okay. We'll just cruise through again. Kids out watering with me. This year, 2019, that was the 9th of October. We had snow on the ground. 19 was a totally different year than 2018. 19, May was cool, so nothing grew. That could have hurt my establishment on the cover crop. September and October were really cool. I did not get the regrowth going around grazing in 2019 like I did 18. Yes, ma'am, you got to.
How accurate are your GPS photos? I mean, how close can you get?
They're going to be just off of my app on my phone. They're going to be within 20, 30 feet as far as where I put my soil samples and took them from. This year also, I built those feeders for 2017, 2018. I switched to bell grazing. I moved to a 3x3 baler because I picked up some more ground anyways. I just take the bells out and dump them. And so the cows, they do kind of leave a little bit. I do a mix of hay, alfalfa, and straw. And they slick up the hay pretty good. They do leave some straw, so I'll see if I have to address any issues next spring with too much material. But for the most part, I can see the rows that I've fed them in, and I just keep moving them south to make sure it's an even distribution as best I can. And that was yesterday morning. It was all blowing and snowing. We know what yesterday morning was. The cows were out in the field. They weren't in the yard. They have free access to go to the yard. The water trough's there. They can do it. If they want, they can stay out in the field and eat snow if they want. That's where they were at 11 o'clock yesterday morning. So differences compared 2018 to 19, May was cool. September and October were cool. We didn't have the hot days, but I did have some stress, just larger cattle and calves needing more water. And then the fall planted covers, the stuff I did after my cereal crops, it didn't even emerge really because it was just, I had a little tiny plant, but it was just too cool, I would say, this year for a whole lot. So what's next for me? Diversity is a big thing, trying to add some more crops, cash crops. I'm going to try, I talked to Dan Lakey a few months ago and talked to him about some intercropping that he had done with peas and barley. I'm going to try that. Chicken, sheep, goats, pigs. I'm kind of in the same boat. You know, what can I add next without adding more acres? Goats and pigs and sheep. Pigs might be a little hard on things, but the goats will eat some of the weed stuff, and chickens. And then I just read a thing yesterday about virtual fencing. You know, that might help graze some of my dry land ground or something. I don't know. So that's my family. I'll get done.